Ah, the worst Gen 4 starter. I'm kidding. It's only second worst. It is a simple concept executed well. What if a tortoise was also the seed of a plant, and as the tortoise grows, so does the tree on its shell? It recalls the idea of world turtles, the best cosmological concept, which is also hinted at subtly in the Pokédex entries. But Turtwig, right. Like most starters, it's mostly designed to be cute, with its broad, smiling jaw and oversized upper lip and chibi proportions. The little twig with the 2 leaves on its head is just adorable. It's the Pokemon version of essentially a propeller hat, and I'm really charmed by it. As for Groddle, well, middle stages are often awkward, and with its weird, almost caterpillar-shaped body and 2 bushes on the back, it looks a little bit half-finished. It really could have done more to imply a flowering garden on the back. It looks way too barren for what it is. Torterra, though? Yeah, Torterra, this Pokemon is so fucking cool. A giant tortoise with legs like tree trunks and claws made of boulders and hills and trees perched upon its back. That rules. My only criticism is that it's way too small in-game. Like, if it was Wailord-sized, then it would be S tier. Chimchar is probably the weakest design among the starters, and both it and Monferno never really transcend being just monkeys with fire on their tails. Chimchar does have the, well, it's supposed to be the shape of a small ember on its head, but let's be real, it looks like a poop, and there just isn't enough there to make the design more than it seems like on the surface. Monferno, at least, has the blue and red face markings, which recall the idea of a mandrill, which is cool, and a little bit of that wild white collar, which is okay, that's something, but it still barely looks special. If anything, this looks like a first stage evolution. Infernape, thankfully, makes up for a lot of lost ground. The billowing fire hair gives it a sense of dynamism, the powerful red crest on the face makes it look tough, the bright white is striking, and the decorative gold pads on its body recalls how divinity is often decorated in Asian art. I know it's trite to compare every mystical monkey to Sun Wukong, but it really does feel like some of him or Hanuman is in here. The design has a ton of charisma, and I really like that it remains slim. It looks agile, quick, clever, and more than a little mischievous. Weak pre-evolution designs are definitely worth it in order to get to here. And here we have the best Gen 4 starter. This little guy is such an instant and immediate charmer of a design. And of course, being a baby penguin, how could it not be? But also, the way that its blue markings are fastened on its beak and cascade down into a cloak hanging over its shoulders gives it a real preschool kid in a raincoat vibe that I love. And the 2 buttons on the tummy, like it's wearing overalls, it's just, God, it's cute. Piplup, meanwhile, avoids the awkwardness of middle stage evolutions by looking both cute with its plump little body and buttons and tailcoat, like a kid wearing his first fancy suit at a function, but also like it's fast and powerful thanks to those sleek fins and the crest on its head. But Empoleon, holy sh*, this thing looks like a legendary. The beak extending into a shape which is both crown and trident is genuinely brilliant design, the very picture of a nautical ruler. The stippling on the white markings makes it look like the fancy cravat of a king or a prince. The hard edges of its collar look at once regal and dangerous, like it could slice you to pieces with it, and together with those shield-like hard fins, it gives it an air of both invulnerability and lethality. This thing is intimidating, it's regal, it's powerful, and it's amazing. Why hello there, Gen 4 Pidgey, what is your deal? Starly isn't spectacular. It's a fairly literal translation of a starling, albeit with a quite compelling graphic design on the face, and good use of that one white tail feather and the little cowlick on the head to give it some personality. Staravia then mostly doubles down on those ideas, hardening the face mask into a star and really curling that cowlick into a spit curl that, along with the severe expression it now has, gives it some strong, prideful, confrontational energy. All of this comes to a head culminating naturally and very smoothly in Staraptor, which moves basically all of the design detail directly to the head and the face. Its face crest now spreads out in sharp spikes, the eyes are red and focused and serious, and it's grown what always seemed to me like a Bozozoku hairstyle, that particular brand of youth counterculture that is so embedded in Japanese pop culture. The blood red that the pompadour is tipped with gives it some much needed color and more menace, almost as though it's daring you to comment on its silly hairdo like it wants to start a fight. I feel like the rest of the design is a little bit neglected here, could use some more detail, but all in all, it's effective, it looks powerful, it has personality, so I can't say it doesn't work. You know, if Bidoof didn't evolve, I might genuinely put it in S tier. Every generation needs its Rattata, right? A mostly weak, somewhat cute, but usually quickly discarded normal type with an early evolution that is entirely designed to be left behind. Bidoof is that for Gen 4, but who could ever abandon this precious child? Look at him! I struggle to even really articulate it because the sweetness of this character design is just so obvious. Bidoof's shape language is very simple. It's all circles and rounded shapes, which makes it adorable, and then that creates an eye-catching contrast with the sharp rectangles of its teeth, and that enormous overbite combined with the tiny little red clown nose and those sweet little button eyes that are just a little too far apart. God, it just looks so precious. It's so f***ing cute. What dark alchemy did they pour into this beast to make it so f***ing appealing? If you can put him in a PC box and leave him without feeling guilty, your soul will not see heaven. The evolution though, I mean, Bibarel is fine, it's cute enough, but between the weird eye mask, the pinprick eyes that just don't work on it, and the loss of a lot of its woolly fluffiness, the magic is just lost. It's still cute, but it's not Bidoof. I don't usually give bug types much attention because, well, they tend to be weak and I don't really like their type matchups, but Kriketot is a deceptively adorable little thing. With its wide collar and markings on the chest, it looks like it's wearing a fancy old-timey outfit, and depending on whether you see the round shape on its face as a mouth or a nose, it looks various degrees of awkward or shy. The color scheme is maybe a little bit drab on this thing, but what a dapper little gentleman it is. That all comes very much to a head in Kriketot with its big imperious mustache and the wings hanging off its body like fancy coattails. Going by its Pokédex entries, it's supposed to evoke the idea of a virtuoso composer, playing on the idea of grasshoppers and crickets as violinists, and yeah, I can see that idea. I think maybe the markings on the body could have evoked the white tie dress a little bit more explicitly, or maybe have its antenna shaped like musical notes or something, but yeah, no, on a baseline, I buy this as a design. It is perfectly effective. It's not especially exciting or anything, but it's a fun idea, and it works pretty darn well, actually. I'm gonna get yelled at for this, but I don't really like Shinx. It's supposed to be an electric lynx cub, more or less, but the face with the big ears always looked mouse or monkey-like to me, and between those double circle eyes and the tail and the markings on the ears and the big round head, it feels like it's trying way too hard to be a cute and appealing little mascot Pokemon, in turn completely failing to feel electrical, at least to me. Luxio fares better. The wild black mane makes it feel less like a mascot trying to sell me plushies, and it gets a lot more cat-like, although I still do wish that they would do something more interesting with the yellow color in this design than just bands around the legs, something that's evocative of electricity, spiky yellow accents on the fur, a lightning bolt design on the head, just anything. Luxray, in the end, does kind of find its hook. The wild spiky mane and fur gives it the vibe of being scorched by unleashed sparking electricity, and the intense red and yellow eyes gives it a real sense of power and menace, but I still think the use of yellow is really weak here. It feels so perfunctory and vanishing under the pitch black, like it's embarrassed of the color, and the little spark tail, like that identifying feature from the first stage, doesn't work anymore because now Luxray looks way too edgy for it. Has there ever been an evolution line that looks more like goons than Cranidos and Rampardos? Cranidos looks like a cute goon, to be clear, like the dim-witted sidekick to some cartoon bully who gets a redemption arc when it turns out he just doesn't know how to make friends. The big round skull, the flat dopey eyes, and those lines coming down from the mouth suggesting a cheek full of baby fat, it's just, oh, it has so much character. He's so cute. By the time it evolves into Rampardos, it fully has cartoon mobster enforcer energy. It looks like its only voice lines in a movie should be, "Yes, boss, you got it, boss. You want I should take care of him, boss?" And that vibe is substantially enhanced by the dark rim around the blue skull, which now suggests almost kind of a bowler hat shape. Combine that with a greater sense of danger and power that comes from its many spikes and the sharper jaw shape, and you've got a Pokemon that has some goddamn personality. I really like these guys. The thing about Sheildon is that the face is like 90% of the design. The body is there, sure, but it's just a generic sort of vaguely dinosaur shape with yellow and grey, utterly generic. It's the big oval face shield that's the star of the show. It's rendered in black, which creates a strong contrast with the bright colors on the rest of the design, and with those two light ridges creating a sort of male slot for the eyes to peek out of, that creates a feeling somewhere halfway between a shield and a helmet. I think its body could do a little bit more to be interesting, but it's functional and it's very memorable. Bastiodon takes that feedback on board, cranking up the detailing and armoring on the body to match the now much more elaborate face shield, and I really like the idea here. It is now designed to evoke the idea of a fortified castle wall, complete with towers, ramparts, and window markings, and its eyes are hidden behind horns and teeth, which again creates that vibe of a knight's protective visor. It's a very coherent theme and really decent design, even if I think the colors are maybe a little bit boring. Burmy is an interesting one. It's based on bagworms, which make their cocoons out of materials they find in their environment as camouflage, hence the many different forms it can take on. The body itself is neutral black with bright yellow eyes, in large part to create a neutral canvas on which its various cloaks can provide a high contrast, and that's quite effective design. Where Madam's design does much the same thing as Burmy's, but just, more, and it dials up the femininity of the presentation by adding pigtails made out of the materials of its cloak and taking on a top-heavy fancy lady with a fur coat sort of profile, again reflecting the way that female bagworms remain in their larval stages their whole lives. It's solid stuff, design-wise. Mothim, the male version, instead gets the traditional bug Pokemon final stage, subtyping into flying and growing wings. The black body remains and is used in the same way as a means to create contrast, but it adopts a bright yellow, orange, and white color scheme, and especially those antennae gives its face a sharp, slightly dangerous-feeling character. It's a honey thief, according to the Pokédex, which is perhaps why it has those fingers on its wings, like grasping little hands. This whole line is fairly solid design craft. It's not exceptional, but I have no complaints. I've never really given Combee a second thought, but upon re-examining it for this review, I realized, hang on, these are freaking brilliant! It's a bee made of hexagons that are fused together into one body, quite literally embodying the way that a beehive is a kind of gestalt entity, a unity composed of thousands of individuals joined together into one organism. The bees are the hive, in this case quite literally. Vespiquen then takes that metaphor one step further, being a queen bee who is quite literally also her own hive. Much like Torterra, I feel like the biggest flaw here is that she's just too small. I feel like she would look way cooler if she was way bigger. But the underlying idea is absolutely killer, and if you made it even slightly less kid-friendly, it would make for an amazing horror monster. Having the top half of the body literally carry a beehive around beneath it, shaped in a way to evoke a big regal gown, that's very clever. And the blood-red eyes and sharp mandibles, in contrast with the adorableness of Combee, visually communicates the scale of difference in power between the two forms, but also that Vespiquen isn't ruling by consensus. She wasn't elected. This is pheromone mind control, and she is a tyrant. It rules. They keep trying to make Pikachu 2 happen, and Pikachu 2 just isn't gonna happen. That's not Pachirisu's fault, of course, and it does a much better job of distinguishing itself from Pikachu than Plusle and Minun did last generation. It's a squirrel, first of all, rather than a mouse, and gets its electric theming from that bright blue streak on its body, as well as from sharp spikes in the blue fur that contrast with the soft, round adorableness of the rest of the design. I kinda feel like it would have been better if it hadn't gone for the bright yellow cheek pads, because again, that just reminds me of Pikachu's iconic red cheek pads and invites comparison, but also it confuses the color scheme a bit. Am I meant to understand the color blue as representing its electric power, or is it the yellow? Even the Pokédex seems to get confused about whether it stores its electricity in the cheeks or in the big fluffy tail, and electric cheeks is Pikachu's thing, so focusing on the tail and designing that out more explicitly would have given it a much stronger sense of its own identity. For all the comparisons I'm making, though, it's not fair to call it just a Pika clone. It does have its own ideas, and frankly, I would have loved to see an evolution for it that really leans into the static electric fluffy fur concept. I really like Buizel. What a clever way to design a water Pokemon. As the name suggests, it's designed to look somewhat like an otter mixed with a weasel, using warm umber and cream colors for the fur, which then contrasts brightly with the yellow flotation ring around its neck and the blue fish fins on its arms. The fins, especially along with the double tails, push it towards almost a supernatural or magical feeling creature, but not so far as to lose the sense of being an animal, like a Pokemon is kind of supposed to be. It's a good balance. Floatzel takes all of that and pushes it even further, doubling down on the weasel-like expressiveness and turning its flotation ring into a full body ring, making it essentially an otter weasel, which is also like an inflatable dinghy. And seriously, using life jackets and pool noodles and swim wings and the like as part of a design inspiration for a Pokemon, that's cool, that's whimsical, that's a fun idea. If I have a criticism, it's that maybe the fins are a little bit overkill. They're there to add blue and fish vibes to make sure the water theme gets across, but I don't think it needs them. Weasel and Floatzel just work. They look like the best companions you could ever have to the beach or the water park. Cherubi as a design has always felt a touch too literal to me. Like, it's literally just a pair of cherries with faces painted on them and tiny little squishmallow legs. And because they express almost nothing beyond, I'm a cherry with a cute face, they end up in that generic mascot design space where you might as well see them printed on a pack of fruit snacks as show up in a Pokemon game. There's just nothing distinctive or distinguishing about them. They don't have any clever ideas about what to do with the idea of a cherry Pokemon. Cherrim does a lot better, though, with its overcast and sunshine forms incorporating the idea of dormancy and bloom plant life cycles into the design. The overcast form in particular has a charming air of sleepiness about it, very me when I stayed up too late gaming relatable. The sunshine form, on the other hand, is, well, the idea is good, but I think it looks a little bit messy between the many petals, the orbs on its head, and the yellow and pink color scheme that doesn't do a great job of contrasting with itself. It's not terrible or anything, it fits the sunshine vibes of that form, I just don't think it pops very well. It's indistinct to me. Shellos and Gastrodon are based on sea slugs and nudibranches, a profoundly weird group of sea creatures which I wish even more Pokemon would take design inspiration from. The Shellos forms play to the idea of ocean environments shaping the physiology of species that live there, which is a neat little trick, and I do like the way that it's expressed, not as changes in the fundamental morphology of the creature, but in accessories like hair or horns or spikes or wings along the shell. It's cute. What I really appreciate about Gastrodon, though, is that with their triple eyes and downturned slit mouths, they look a little bit weird and a bit alien, which I think is a lot more interesting than if they had just continued the humanoid faces and big adorable eyes and smiles of Shellos. And again, I do appreciate the way that East Sea Gastrodon seems designed to try and hide amongst seaweed, while the West Sea type looks more like it lives among rocks and sand. It is a really solid design line with a cool inspiration, even if none of its forms ever get particularly exciting or spectacular. The one thing it does lack to me is a little bit of that wow factor. Drifloon and Drifblim are the poster children for Pokémon is secretly a horror game franchise game theories, with their Pokédex entries implying that they quite literally steal and kill people. The Pokemon Sword Pokédex entry literally says that Drifblim is a collection of souls burdened with regrets, which, Jesus Christ. As designs, though, they are fairly simple. They are balloons with little wisps of clouds on their heads and eyes painted onto the body to approximate a head. Drifloon is a party balloon, Drifblim is a hot air balloon, and it's a very natural progression for the line. And for what it is reasonably effective design. The details, though, are where things get fun, like that yellow X between the eyes, for example, which implies what exactly? Well, it implies that the balloon has a puncture, right? And for a balloon, a puncture is death. Hence, I think, the ghost type and hence the creepy Pokédex entries. I do also like the waving arms hanging off of Drifblim. Their ragged edges sort of imply that they are tethers that have snapped, sending it drifting off aimlessly into the blue, but they also look ever so vaguely like grasping hands reaching out for something, and combined with the blood-red eyes, that does make it creepy to look at. Buneary is a set of good ideas that never really come together, I think. According to the Pokédex and its name, the central idea here is that it has curled up its ears like a spring and they can extend them to jump and punch with incredible power, which, hey, that's a cool idea for a bunny Pokemon, but in practice, that's just not what the design communicates. The ear, first of all, doesn't look coiled at all. It looks like a squashed muffin with whipped cream on top. There's no sense of pent-up power or tension, and the bright cream fur on the bottom half of the Pokemon draws visual attention away from the darker chocolate-covered main body, creating a creature which is visually a lot more focused on looking soft and cute, and which lacks any kind of strong visual hook to make it interesting. It is, to be clear, very adorable, so it's a success on that front, but it's just not exceptional in any way, and the ear gimmick just never comes off. Of course, Buneary's real gimmick isn't its design, it's the friendship mechanic which it was created to interact with, refusing to evolve into its much more popular second stage unless it likes you enough, and that second stage probably deserves its own video. Gonna have to get the spray bottle out for that one. Lopunny is... no, I see you typing that comment. Stop it, get your mind out of the gutter. This is a serious academic exercise. Anyway, Lopunny is a Rule 34 Pokemon. I'm sorry, it just is, and I honestly cannot conceive of the idea that Game Freak didn't know that before they actually published it. It's a result of its very humanoid proportions, especially the wide hips with the fur pattern implying tall boots on its legs. Combined with Lopunny's tendency to hold its fluffy cuffs up in front of its body, it creates the visual outline and silhouette of a classic curvaceous hourglass figure. Its posture and animation, especially in the black and white games, also easily reads as flirtatious, and, furries exist, so the R34 was always going to be inevitable. The design, to a large extent, really seems to invite it. And taking on the merits of being a thirst trap, it's actually really solid design. The huge eyebrows are a striking visual, and the long fluffy ears adds a sense of flow and softness and elegance to the design. It all works as it was clearly intended to work. Innocent enough to work in a children's game, naughty enough to cause problems on the internet. I couldn't fit the Megaform into the main review, so let's just tackle it here. First of all, giving it a fur pattern that implies torn pantyhose exposing its thighs is further confirmation that Game Freak knew exactly what they were doing when they were designing this thing, but the leggings and the now ankle-length white fur shoes also help bring a vibe of active athleticism to the design that helps support its fighting subtype. The huge fur sleeves on the arms, tipped with deadly-looking black claws, do much the same thing, emphasizing power and lethality, and even the ears, which now look like Lopunny has tied its hair down with hair ties, help sell this idea of a normally flirtatious and cute Pokemon that has decided that it's kick some ass o'clock and you've got the first appointment. The eyebrows being reshaped into what is either a cute bow or arguably replacement bunny ear shapes is also good contrast work, adding some nice visual interest to the top half of the design. It's solid design work all around, very effectively adding a new dimension to the base design without losing any of its appeal. It really is no wonder that this Pokemon is so popular. Glameow has never really been particularly notable to me. It is using the classic Pokemon design formula, which is normal animal plus fantastical feature equals Pokemon, with the fantastical feature being that long spiral tail, but the result just doesn't feel either particularly interesting, unique, or appealing. On the other hand, it's also not terrible, like there's nothing particularly wrong with it, it's just not very interesting to me. Bulbapedia has it that the long tail is possibly supposed to evoke rhythmic ribbon gymnastics, but I gotta be honest, I don't really see that here. Perugly is much more interesting, not the least by virtue of being, well, kinda ugly. It has the bulging muscular body of a bulldog, crooked whiskers and ears that look frayed almost as though they've been torn in a fight. Combine that with that jagged gray and white pattern on the fur, almost mimicking scars, and this looks like a rather unpleasant backyard feral cat, and that is something that's an interesting thing to evoke. The Pokédex claims that it gets the bulky physique from wrapping its own tails around its waist to squeeze the body, but that doesn't really come across on the actual model very well, and that's kind of a pity because that's a really cool idea. I don't think I like how Perugly looks necessarily, but I do find it compelling. So, Stunky is a skunk with an ass for a face. It's a fart joke. This Pokemon is a fart joke. Your mileage may vary quite a lot on how funny you're willing to find that, but putting myself in the mindset of a 10-year-old boy, yeah, you know what, I probably would have found that funny at the time, so the joke is successful, at least on that count. Beyond that, though, there's really not a lot to Stunky. It really is just a stylized skunk, although there is something vaguely cat-like about its whiskers and ears also that gives it at least some kind of other feature than just the toilet humor. Skuntank is much the same, but it actually dials up the cat vibes by shrinking the butt face down to an upper snout that is, if anything, kind of Garfield-like almost. And I do like the idea of using the tail as a kind of low-slung pompadour like it's a Bozosoku delinquent or something. That's a clever use of a design element. It does lose something in the trade, though, because the whole central joke of this Pokemon line was that it was a skunk with an ass for a face, and now that it doesn't have an ass for a face, it just ends up looking like, you know, a stylized cat skunk with no gimmick or unique twist at all. And that's certainly more tasteful, but yeah, you know what, it is also more boring. Bronzor seems to be based on antique Asian bronze mirrors, mimicking the orb-decorated style that is sometimes found on them, which that is a really cool and interesting inspiration for a Pokemon, but I don't think it really lands that well. Like, unless you already know what this specific kind of mirror looks like, I don't know how you're supposed to read this design and understand that it's trying to look like, you know, a mirror. What it actually looks like is a weird metal disc or a coin with orbs on it, and it does have a kind of cute little face on the front with a round nose on it, which is not terrible as creature design goes. It's just also really nothing special. The evolution Bronzong, though, might be inspired by an old Japanese folktale about a Buddhist temple melting bronze mirrors down to make a giant bell out of them, which, okay, that's a really interesting inspiration, and Bronzong does look the part of a mysterious ancient bell quite well. Its geometric carvings and details gives it an air of inscrutable antiquity that I think is really cool, and the blood-red eyes also makes it look genuinely kind of scary. While I'm not 100% sure that the long metal arms really work in the design, I think it would be better if the body was fully rigid, I can't deny that it's memorable and has a great silhouette. Chatot is a gimmick Pokemon in the purest sense of the word. It has a signature move which can play back an audio file recorded through the Nintendo DS microphone and which changes properties a little bit depending on what is recorded. That functionality isn't in the more recent Pokemon games, robbing Chatot of its central gimmick, and you know, that's kind of a pity, honestly. As a design, it's a parrot, obviously, because learning sounds and repeating them and all that, and it has a stylized musical note for a head and something like a metronome clicker for a tail, because Game Freak seems to have very optimistically believed that people would whistle for it or sing a little song to be recorded in its gimmick. Aww. Beyond that, it also has a cheerfully multicolored body, which is fun and gives the critter a sort of clown or jester or street performer-esque flamboyant energy that I like, but the head, to me, always ends up looking a little bit too much like a plastic musical note awkwardly stapled to a bird's body without really being connected with the creature itself. It looks a bit like two pieces of clip art that were slapped together in Photoshop rather than something that was designed to be a creature, and so for me, this design ultimately just doesn't quite work. Spiritomb is an interesting Pokemon, and a great example of how much you can miss in a character design when you don't know the cultural context. Because I didn't know that 108 is a spiritually significant number in certain spiritual practices, and that Spiritomb having 108 defense and 108 special defense and being 108 in the Sinnoh Dex and being made of 108 punished spirits is thus a meaningful part of its storytelling. I didn't know about the stories of spirits and demons trapped in stones to atone for their sins that it draws its character design from, and I never noticed that the circling green orbs on its face resembled the kind of prayer beads that such demons might be bound by. Having said all of that, I still kind of don't think the design is ultimately very good. Its spiral eye, stereotypical ghost face feels kind of uninspired and generic, like something you'd see on a Hot Topic t-shirt rather than in mythical ghost stories. I can't help but feel that surely giving it multiple faces with many expressions would do a much better job of telling its story. The context here is absolutely fascinating, but I think the execution could have been a lot better. Gible, the Gen 4 Grindathon pseudo-legendary, and it is a stinking adorable one of the kind. Gible is scarcely more than a mouth with tiny arms and legs and a gregarious demeanor, and it just looks so cute and huggable, like a beautiful little puppy that wants to kill you. Gabite, meanwhile, really just looks like an unfinished Garchomp, which while that's probably appropriate for a middle stage evolution, it also robs it of any independent personality. It has none of the charm of Gible and none of the menace of Garchomp, making it feel entirely perfunctory. Garchomp, finally, is ridiculous, but also cool as fuck. It's very much a tokusatsu Pokemon. This is fully something that Ultraman would fight with its hammerhead shark torpedo face and humanoid anatomy, but it somehow never tips over into looking silly to me. Like, I know that I would have doodled this thing in so many notebooks as a kid, thinking that it was the coolest thing ever. The Mega Form pumps everything cool about Garchomp up to the next level, bringing deadly scythe arms and a sharper jaw and shoulders, and looks like it's wearing a tuxedo with ringed teeth around it. It's exactly the right amount of over-the-top and stupid to be awesome. It's the perfect dragon Pokemon. Hi, Sorry to interrupt the compilation, but if you sat through it this far, I figure maybe you're willing to sit through a little bit of self-promotion in the middle of it too. So, hello, I'm TBSkyen. I'm the guy what makes the videos that you're watching. And if you'd like to support my work, then I have a merchandise store, if you want to buy a cool shirt like this one, or a mug with a long rant on it about character design. I have a tip jar on coffee if you want to send me a one-time tip, I would very much appreciate it. And of course, like every other YouTuber, I also have a Patreon where you can sign up for a monthly donation in return for various perks. If none of that appeals to you, you can also become a member of this channel, and that will give you early access to the shorts as they get uploaded. I usually upload them in batches of 4 or 5, or sometimes more, and there will usually be around a half dozen shorts available only to members before they go live and public to everyone else. So if you're impatient and you want to see the new shorts now, that's an option for you. If you're not in the mood to send money to a YouTuber, frankly, that's entirely understandable given everything that's going on, so instead, maybe consider sending it to Doctors Without Borders or the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. Even a little bit of money can do quite a lot of good in those hands. If you want to see full-length video essays from me, please head over to my main channel. If you want to see reaction videos and long discussion videos, you can check out my reaction channel for that. And if you don't want to do any of this, that's completely okay. You've given me your attention, and that is enough. Let's get back to the Pokemon. I forgot to review Munchlax back in Gen 1, so let's correct that now. It's adorable. Despite being the baby form of Snorlax, it has none of the adult form's comfortable sleepiness about it. Munchlax is awake, aware, and in its artwork especially, with those upward-pointed ears, it presents a kind of Totoro-esque determined energy, marching off in search of adventure and a second breakfast. The big loose coat of fur on its body kind of looks like a childish, oversized pajama dress, but maybe it also implies that this thing is designed with room to expand, as it were, natural loose skin which it aims to fill out in order to build its energy storage, which would be a fun detail. I also really like the dark hood on its face. Again, to me, this reminds me of some kind of cutesy sleeping cap or silly novelty child's hat with eye holes cut into it. And I wasn't kidding when I made the Totoro comparison, because all of that, in combination with the big round eyes with dot pupils, gives this thing a ton of Ghibli energy. Or, alternately, it could be the protagonist of some kind of beloved series of Japan animated children's cartoons from the 80s and 90s, like the Moomins. Look, Munchlax is just excellent. It's a great little baby Pokemon. Riolu, as a design, is a really solid precursor to Lucario. Like, it quite literally just looks like what if Lucario was younger, and as such, it's a very successful design on those terms. Being designed to interact with the friendship mechanic for its evolution, it's built to have young shonen protagonist energy, cute enough that you want to protect it, but determined enough that it looks like it's growing up to be a hero. Lucario, then, is the shadow to Riolu's classic Sonic, darker, edgier, sharper, cooler, and not to be googled with safe search off. It seems to be based off a dog or a jackal, but honestly, this is not an animal Pokemon so much as it is a furry Pokemon. The anthropomorphism seems to be more the point than any actual natural inspiration, which again feels like shonen protagonist energy to me. Lucario really feels to me like it was meant to be the main character in a third-person action platformer spin-off game that Game Freak just never actually got around to making. Its megaform, though, loses me, introducing an awkward red color and trying to add rough, rugged line detail to a character whose design I think requires smooth stylization to work. Like Super Saiyan 4, it tries to do way too much and loses the grace of the original idea. Actual real-life hippos are some of the scariest bastards on God's green earth, but with that super enlarged snout and almost frog-like eyes on top of its head, Hippopotas becomes completely adorable in a Moomin sort of way. And it is really just a fun inversion of the hippo as an animal. Like, what if hippos lived and swam in sand and hated getting wet? What if they blew sand out of their nose instead of water? It's a cute and simple idea, and it's executed really well. Hippowdon feels a little bit like a step back from that. It loses all of the cuteness of Hippopotas in favor of more fully adopting the look of a traditional hippo, with the twist being a almost turtle-like shell on its back, as well as many sand vents on its body, which remain a cool visual component for the creature. The female Hippowdon, with a pure black body that contrasts with blood-red eyes, ends up looking almost demonic and evil, which again is very accurate to real-life hippos, and definitely striking, but I can't help but wish that the line had committed to the whimsy and the cutesy caricature style of Hippopotas and explored that instead. Skorupi is in many ways a very basic bug Pokemon, a classic demonstration in how the franchise stylizes arthropods to make them appealing rather than revolting by smoothing out their shapes into simple and sometimes kind of plastic-like geometry. It's very effective and definitely preferable to realism here, but the result is that Skorupi really doesn't look like anything much more than a bog-standard scorpion to me. Like, there's nothing particularly clever or interesting here, it's just a stylized animal. Drapion seems determined to remedy that, though, because it gets quite weird with it, attaching arms to the side of its head and growing teeth teeth out from the inside of its mouth, while its head now sits at the end of a long dinosaur-like neck attached to a body with tiny weird worm legs. And on top of that, it still has the long hooked tail. This looks like a nightmare that someone had at the Jim Henson Creature Workshop. It looks like the monster in a Muppet remake of The Thing. It is really weird. And I can't help but kind of love that. Like, don't get me wrong, this design is kind of a total mess, but it's an interesting mess, and that is infinitely preferable to being boring. Croagunk is an adorable little bastard, and I do mean bastard. Its design, certainly to me, seems pitched specifically to evoke a bastard vibe. The downturned eyes, broad smiley mouth with a toothy grin, hunched over posture, and, not least, those ruddy red cheek pouches. To me, all of this points towards an impish and mischievous character, but also a youthful one, like a bratty younger sibling who gets attention by playing pranks on the family. The colors are quite nicely balanced, too. Blue and red and black and white form contrasting opposite pairs, balancing each other, while the yellow eyes add a nice accent to the whole thing. And the red middle finger on each of its hands also comes across as classic danger signaling. This part of me is dangerous, as though that's the finger that contains the poison. Toxicroak, then, is basically all of that good stuff, but ramped up in danger with more spiky shapes, more complex black markings, and more red in the color scheme. It's more sinister now, and dangerous rather than mischievous, and with the red claws, it gains a real air of lethality on top of that. It's not just pranks it's pulling anymore. It's just about a perfect evolution of the basic concept. Carnivine feels very much of a kind with Victreebel to me, but where Victreebel plays the carnivorous plant idea with a sense of hungry menace, Carnivine, well, just kind of seems to be having fun with it. Its artwork quite literally gives it a giant toothy Cheshire cat grin, and its 3D animation with those wavy leaf arms and twisting tentacle legs keep its vibes quite light and cheerful, honestly. The Pokédex idea that it wanders around on its legs and attaches itself to trees to hang and catch its prey is fascinating, and it's genuinely quite clever to add the idea of a parasitic vine to the idea of a carnivorous plant, which, oh yeah, Carnot Vine, that's where the name is from. Very clever. You get points for the pun. Now, while the color scheme is nothing really to write home about, it's just another green and yellow plant Pokemon mostly, I quite like the asymmetric red tentacles among the legs. There's something striking about them, especially when you imagine them wrapped around the trunk of a tree somewhere as it's hanging down to catch its prey. I don't know that I love Carnivine exactly, but I'd love to see it get an evolution that expands on its ideas, because I think there's more territory to explore here. Phione is a fish. It's really sort of a kind with Goldeen in that way, which is also, you know, a fish, but perhaps even more than Goldeen. Phione looks to me like a fancy aquarium fish of some kind, like a neon tetra or something. The main unique trait here is supposed to be the butterfly wing-shaped tail fins, which, while nothing spectacular, is at least an interesting mixing of shape language, and a perfectly plausible one for creatures as weird as fish tend to be. I also do like that the light and dark halves of the body clearly display counter-shading. That's just a kind of neat little biological detail. Lumineon feels much the same as Phione, moving the butterfly wings up the body and taking on a more chill vibe with those half-lidded eyes, and being even fancier, this looks even more like something you'd find in someone's monstrously expensive home aquarium, which I guess makes it a solid evolution of the concept that it came from. But honestly, I just can't get excited or interested about either of these things. They're fish that look like fish. I guess maybe fish people will find them more fascinating. So, Snover and its evolutions are Pokemon's iteration of the Yeti, and it's quite a clever one. It seems to be based on evergreen trees covered in snow, which, like, oh yeah, that would make perfect sense as natural camouflage for an elusive cryptid hiding in a frozen forest. Snover comes across as a bush or a sapling, though, short and squat and round, which makes it cute and quite innocent looking in its way, like it's from a cutesy fairy tale or something. There's a little bit of that Ghibli creature energy here, too, which I quite like. Not so cuddly as to be a marketable Disney sidekick. It retains just a little bit of an air of something mysterious. Abomasnow, on the other hand, is kind of f***ing terrifying, actually, with its angry eyes and spiky shapes on the face and hands and those long, thick, powerful arms. This looks like something you slowly back away from, and the Mega form looks like something which it is frankly already too late to run from. An enraged beast protecting its territory or its young. It looks wild and powerful and dangerous in a way that frankly sometimes even legendary Pokemon don't really manage to do. Rotom is a funny little gimmick Pokemon, proceeding from some curious inspirations. It is quite literally a ghost in the machine, an electric spirit that possesses household appliances like a poltergeist to make mischief. As Bulbapedia has it, there's some inspirational overlap here with Japanese folklore about tools gaining consciousness once they get old enough, like the Kaza Obake, which is a possessed umbrella, but I find it quite charming that what Rotom possesses is things like washing machines and lawnmowers instead. This is in service of the type-changing gimmick, of course, but I really like the way it remixes its form between them, always remaining consistent with the rounded shape language and the spike on its head in a way that makes it very recognizable in each incarnation, and always friendly in its aspect, like a prankster, not a ghost from a horror movie. Although you probably should keep your feet away from the lawnmower form, that one looks a little vicious. Really like that the plasma arms on the heat form resemble oven mitts. That's just a really cute little detail, and in general, the plasma aura is used very effectively to accentuate each form's typing. It's very good design, and frankly, I would take a Rotom over an AI in my phone any day. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf are another legendary trio of Pokemon that look deliberately odd and alien enough that they don't really map cleanly onto any animal or clear real-world inspiration. Bulbapedia claims they might be based on the Japanese imperial regalia, the mirror, the jewel, and the sword, which is an unsourced claim, but plausible, I guess, especially if you consider Arceus the emperor in that equation, since they are said to be made by it to be its servants. They have identical grey bodies and identical red jewels in their identical tails and on their foreheads, and they are differentiated primarily by their primary colors and head crests. For my money, none of them manage to actually visually evoke the things they're meant to represent particularly strongly, knowledge, emotion, and willpower respectively, leaning more on a non-specific abstraction to get their esoteric concept across. Still, they are odd and distinct enough to make them a solid trio of weird fae-like creatures, I guess, and their designs serve their role in the Gen 4 story well enough, which is perhaps the most important thing. I do wish they evoked a little bit more of Arceus' shape language, though, because that would connect them to it much more explicitly, but well. The Pokemon of Myth group all have what I term in my head school notebook designs, which is not a derogatory, but a vibe. It's an approach to design that throws every cool thing it can think of at the wall and then smooths out whatever happens to stick. In Dialga's case, this means a vaguely dinosaur-esque body with as much sharp, angular, cool-looking steel nonsense attached as possible without overloading it into an indistinct mess of details. It's supposed to represent time in the Pokemon cosmology, which, I mean, that is a kind of tough and abstract thing to have to represent visually, and I honestly don't think it does a very good job of it. Instead, it prioritizes looking powerful, imposing, strange, and dangerous, and that I think it manages to do really well. Its design also maintains a stark contrast with Palkia and Giratina while evoking the vibes of Arceus and that particular brand of geometric cosmic strangeness, and that's something that the whole trio is actually quite good at. Absent context, all of these Pokemon's designs are, let's be honest, kind of nonsense, but in context with one another, they make a genuinely very well-designed, coherent whole. Dialga's origin form, which was introduced over a decade since its original design, attempts a really interesting reinterpretation of this creature. Ostensibly, this is the true form of Dialga, unlike its base form, which is merely the restricted form that it takes on when restrained by mundane reality. And so this form gets even more abstract and odd, but it also begins to much more closely resemble Arceus, especially with that geometric ring around its middle? Is that the middle? Probably the middle. And this creates a much more successful close association between it and Arceus. Like the base form, this is designed that essentially looks like nonsense absent its context. It has heavy club-like legs on the front, blue knee spikes, and an upper body that looks like a Gundam head attached to a bullet vibrator along with a metal knife fan on its ass and spindly horse-like hind legs. But again, in context, especially with Palkia's origin form and Arceus, there's a really compelling and strange cosmic visual language that begins to emerge around the Pokemon of Myth. Not a language that makes sense necessarily, but a unique and interesting one, which I quite appreciate. Like Dialga, Palkia has what I affectionately call school notebook design, a style of design that throws as many cool shapes as it can at the wall and then smooths them into something that's hopefully coherent. Palkia, representing space in the space and time dichotomy with Dialga, does not represent the concept of space especially well on a visual level, but it also doesn't really seem to be trying to. Rather, it maintains a strong balanced contrast in its shape language with Dialga and Giratina, which makes their group visually compelling as a whole. So, Dialga is on 4 legs, Palkia on 2, Giratina on many. Dialga is geometrical and angular, Palkia is rounded and streamlined, Giratina is jagged and rough, and so on and so on. Palkia definitely has the tokusatsu monster suit vibe, like it should have fought against Mothra or Gamera in the 80s, but it also has a certain sleek deadliness to it that gives it a real sense of power. Like Dialga, this design doesn't make any sense absent its context, but the weirdness is part of the charm, and I think part of the point. And, like, let's be honest, if you doodle that on your school notebook, you'd be pretty pleased with yourself. Palkia's origin form, like Dialga's, is a very interesting bit of design retcon, bringing both of those Pokemon much closer to Arceus visually by adopting Arceus' equine body plan and the distinctive ring around its midriff. Where Dialga's origin form gets even more abstract and weird, however, Palkia's becomes much more organic and natural, looking like a centaur knight with its decorative wings and greaves on the front legs. This is largely down to its rounded and smooth shape language, which it maintains to keep a strong contrast with Palkia and Giratina, while the smoother shapes also evoke the smoother and rounder outer parts of Arceus' shape design, very successfully connecting the two. I think I prefer the accelerated weirdness of Dialga's origin form to this, though, because Palkia's origin form just seems to make it more comprehensible and kind of normal, which, okay, I get that as a point of contrast with the others, which are weird, and it helps to balance that strangeness, but it's also less interesting than the cosmic weirdness of its siblings, which, I don't know, I just kind of wish there was more bizarreness here, something a little bit more off the wall rather than something that essentially just kind of looks like a centaur. I don't really get Heatran, I think. Like, it's a legendary Pokemon that a player must go to some considerable trouble to acquire, but it doesn't really look like that much. It's a four-legged grub with a fairly unspectacular skull mask and orange and brown coloration, and there's very little here that makes it stand apart or look special from any other fire-type Pokemon. Like, this looks less exceptional than Magmar to me. To my eyes, this looks much more like the middle stage of some forgotten three-stage evolution line, which would have become something fearsome and spectacular if it had been allowed to evolve, but which is now just stuck at that awkward middle phase, being neither Stage 1 cute or Stage 3 awesome. Bulbapedia has it that this is supposed to represent the planet's molten steely core, and as such, maybe it's supposed to be thematically part of the whole space and time creation myth thing that Gen 4 has got going on, but I'm sorry, I just don't really see that. It literally just looks like a lava bug, and I don't understand what exactly is supposed to be legendary about this, except, I guess, the unique fire-steel typing. But I'm looking at the design here, and there's just not that much to it. Regigigas is an interesting payoff to the original three Regis, where they are elemental golems, as it were, constructs made of specific materials. Regigigas is the craftsman who made them in its own image, which in a sense makes Regigigas the god of the Regis, which is an interesting little synergy with the golem myth that underlies the whole line. Perhaps to that end, Regigigas is a little bit more abstract in its design, pure white with a strange geometric pattern of black on it, and in stark contrast to those sharp patterns, its body and fingers are rounded and organic. Along with gold accent pieces, this also gives Regigigas more or less the color scheme of Arceus, actually, further reinforcing the idea that this is some kind of lesser creator god. The Pokédex also supports this, describing myths of Regigigas towing the continents into their current position, giving it a creator role on the planet, even if not in the universe, like Arceus. The detail I like the most about Regigigas, though, is the plants and foliage growing on it, like moss on some forgotten statue that has come to life, which gives it a sense of ancientness that I think it really benefits from. Giratina has always looked kind of awkwardly squashed to me. Like, there's something about that squat body with the legs so close together and those itty-bitty tiny wings that makes it just look a little bit goofy to me and undercuts any real sense of awe-imposing scale that the creature might have had. Also, the red and black stripes along the front makes it look like emo punk fashion circa 2003. As we discussed with Dialga and Palkia, though, there's method to the madness here, as the shape language of Giratina seems calculated very much to contrast with theirs, centipede leg arrangement and all. And with its black and white and gold color scheme, it quite closely evokes Arceus' colors, while also clearly representing something more chaotic and aggressive than Arceus. And if this Pokemon is meant to be a representation of antimatter and opposite to Arceus, hey, that's not the worst way to do that, I suppose. It really feels like this Pokemon would work better if it had more space to spread out in, and it looks like a complete mess without its context, but it's not without its merits, and indeed, the awkwardness may have been a little bit intentional, as we shall see with the origin form. Giratina's base form, like I said, has always looked awkwardly squished to me, like something that's trying to look grand and imposing, but is constrained by a lack of room. But that might have been on purpose, because the origin form really gets to let loose. Rather than squished itty-bitty tiny wings, now it has these mile-long dark claw tentacles. Instead of a row of legs awkwardly close together, it is a serpentine dragon with rows of spikes down its side. And even the constraining golden ribs that once clung close to its neck have opened up and become a claw-like mane, almost, continuing the shapes of its Gundam like face crest. In this form, not only is it a perfect contrast to both Palkia and Dialga's origin forms, but a perfect opposite of Arceus in its shape language. It's also menacing and looks quite violent and dangerous, which again makes sense if it is, insofar as the metaphor makes any sense, the devil of the Pokemon universe and opposite to Arceus. The black and red stripes still look a little silly to me, though. Like, that looks like a shirt that someone bought in Hot Topic in 2005. It doesn't really look as intimidating as it's probably supposed to. I'm sort of in two minds about Cresselia. On the one hand, especially in its artwork, its many curved shapes evoke the moon genuinely quite beautifully, and it has a real divine aspect to it. There's an elegance here that I really like. On the other hand, its body looks really kind of silly. Like, this is a featherless, legless, wingless swan, effectively, and it looks goofy like a marshmallow peep. I really feel like it needed wings or legs or something to give it a sense that it can interact with the world and move and not be totally immobile. And I get that the energy ribbons are supposed to stand in for those things, I just don't think they really manage it. It looks too much like a toy or a tchotchke of some kind. Again though, so much about this Pokemon is actually genuinely quite beautiful, especially that head crest, which does a great job of tying it to the moon and to moonlight. I don't think it's bad design, I just think it undercuts itself a little bit with the goofiness of that legless, wingless, featherless kind of plastic body. Phione and Manaphy are interesting. Bulbapedia has them as based on sea angels, which, I mean, okay, I guess maybe, but if so, I wish they were more based on them, because those creatures get really weird, and these guys... Well, Phione and Manaphy rather fall in the mascot camp of designs, you know, cutesy big head with big eyes and stylized soft simple bodies with easily printable markings. The kind of design that is easily converted to a plushie. But this is not necessarily a criticism. Both creatures are cute and certainly odd and unique enough so as to be their own thing. Manaphy's yellow markings and eyes in particular are well chosen to make it stand apart from Phione, literally lighting up its eyes with intelligence and giving it a little bit more of a sense of power relative to Phione's uniform blue colors. I like the conceit from the Pokedex that nobody understands how these two species relates to each other. It mirrors the mysteries of actual deep-sea ecology in the real world and allows for a small physical difference to be an intriguing rather than a merely incidental part of their character designs. Darkrai is Cresselia's counterpart, the new moon to Cresselia's crescent and full moon, and you can definitely see the two as opposites in their shape language and color language as well. Cresselia is all smooth curves and clean lines, pastels and low contrast, while Darkrai is jagged, chaotic, spiky, and extremely high in contrast with its white, red, and black central color scheme. This works well with the oppositional effect that the two have on dreams, too. Cresselia causes pleasant dreams because, oh, it's nice and soft and round, and Darkrai causes nightmares because spiky and evil. And this Pokemon really does look like a boogeyman or a ghost with its billowing trails and tail, which are, again, a nice contrast with Cresselia's almost plastic-like physical stiffness. On the downside, it also looks like it could be an enemy type in, like, any Kingdom Hearts game, and it dips perhaps a little bit too much into the generic fantasy wraith aesthetic. It is humanoid, again, probably to contrast Cresselia's animal aspect, but maybe a slightly more animalistic design would have helped it a little bit, because sometimes it really doesn't look that much like it's a creature from Pokémon. Shaymin is a Pokemon movie-ass Pokemon design. It's incredibly adorable and has a lot of protagonist energy, especially in the Sky form, that you just kind of don't get with regular Pokemon design first and foremost for the games. There's an emphasis on appeal and humanoid emotional relatability here. It's designed to be a character more than a creature. And that's not necessarily a critique, it's designed for what it's for, it's just an observation. Landform Shaymin is, oh my god, it's cute. A hedgehog whose quills are grass and flowers, that is absolutely fantastic. And the big pink flowers on the sides of its head gives it a fashionable sense of beauty on top of all of that. The Sky form, meanwhile, as we said, goes hard for plucky cartoon protagonist energy with those spiky Klonoa wing ears, the sharper shape language, and most of all, those dramatic neckerchief flower petals in bright heroic red. This thing permanently looks like it's about to deliver a massive special move while loudly affirming that my friends are my power, and it's going to defeat the evil bad guy. Again, this is much more of a character than a creature design, but it's a very charming character design. It will never stop being funny that in the Pokemon universe, a 10-year-old can capture and control God with a plastic ball they bought at a convenience store. Arceus' design is appropriately odd for a creator god. It's horse-like, but with a head like a helmeted knight or perhaps some kind of dragon, which certainly brings to mind the idea of the Chilean or Longma creatures out of East Asian mythology, which are chimeric horse-like dragon deities. There is also, though, to me, a sense here of both abstraction and geometry. Abstraction in the organic and inorganic contrasting shape of its base body, and geometry in the golden ring around its middle and the symmetry and the rigid face shapes that it's built with. Whatever vision you might want to build of a creator god, it probably should be weird and kind of hard to comprehend on sight. I think Arceus could probably have gotten even weirder with it, and I kind of wish it had some sort of origin form thing that got really incomprehensible, but maybe that's just nitpicking. Arceus sits in the uncanny valley between the bizarre and the recognizable, and that's probably the perfect place for it. Anyway, if you ever get an Arceus, absolutely use it as your HM dump, because I just think that's funny. And that is a review of every Pokemon in Generation 4. Generation 4 is an interesting one, because while earlier generations did dabble with mythology, Gen 4 is the first one to really attempt a cosmology, a physical cosmology of the Pokemon world. Like, Groudon and Kyogre may be embodiments of the land and the sea and so on, but going from that to Pokemon which literally embody the concepts of creation and space-time on a universal scale, it's a bit of a jump, and it's certainly a bit of a jump on the power scale. Like I said, it will never not be funny that a 10-year-old with a plastic ball they bought at a supermarket can capture and command the power of God, but it also escalates the power fantasy of Pokemon to a pretty extreme place, which I think the later games have done a pretty good job of climbing down from ever since. Generation 5 is next, which means I get to have the fun of pissing off 66% of Pokemon fans by not picking their starter as the best design of the generation, but also, maybe I should do a slightly more long-form video talking about the ethics of Pokemon training and what the series was trying to do with the story of N. Anyway, that's a concern for another time. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Please remember to be kind to one another, stand in solidarity with those who struggle, and may the tides of history wash gently over us all.